In this video, I'm going to demonstrate the use of the if-then statement. The if-then statement allows conditional branching within your applications. In other words, it allows you to evaluate certain conditions, and if they're met, then execute some code, and if they're not met, then execute some different code. So here's a very simple application I created called if-then-else, and we started with a very simple case. If you recall from the previous video, more about console apps, we were able to pass in an array of values and then reference one of the values. And in this case, we're going to check to see if the first value that's passed in is equal to Mo. If it is, then console.writeLine Mo is entered. And if. Let me ask you a question. What if the first value that's passed into our console application doesn't equal Mo? What do you think will happen? If you guess that nothing will happen, you're absolutely correct. Since there is no other code in the application, it won't execute this console.writeLine Mo is entered, and so you'll see nothing on the screen. So let's test our first pass of this application. Let's go ahead and build if-then-else. And I bring up my command line window and notice that I've navigated to C projects if-then-else and then into the bin directory where our project is created. And this is the output of our compiled file. And again, you can put these projects anywhere you want to. Whoops, sorry about that. You can put these projects anywhere you want to. I choose to put them in a projects directory and then name it whatever the project is. So in this case, if-then-else. So let's run it. If-then-else. And the first time we'll type in Mo. And it successfully finds that Mo was entered. Let's type in if-then-else Larry. Nothing happens. So now that we figured out how to test a single condition, the next question comes up, well, what if I want to do something different if the value is not Mo? And in that case, we'll create an else statement. So I've taken the liberty of pasting some code into our example, adding this else statement, and then adding a different line of code. Console.writeLine must be curly. So let's look at the logic one more time. If the command argument, the first one, is Mo, then we'll print out Mo is entered. However, if it doesn't equal Mo, then we will write out the value must be curly. So now let's build our application and then bring up our console window. Let's type in Mo again, and you can see that Mo is entered. Now we'll type in if-then-else Larry, then we get the statement must be curly. So it evaluated whether or not Larry was equal to Mo, and since it was not, then it printed out another line. Now, it just so happens that that line is not representative of the data that was actually entered. So say, for example, we want to check one more condition. We want to check if somebody entered Mo, then print out Mo is entered. If somebody typed in Larry like we did, then we want a different line to be printed out. In this case, maybe Larry was entered. But if neither of those two were, then we want curly to be entered. And the way that we do that is with a else-if statement. So again, I've taken the liberty of pasting some code in. You'll notice that I've added this else-if before the else. Else if our value in question equals Larry, then write to the console window, Larry was entered. So let's look at the logic one more time. If Mo, then type out this line. If it's else, if it's Larry, then type out this line. Otherwise, else, it must be curly. Now there's one thing I'd like to say here, that the else statement always has to be at the very end of your structure. However, we can add another one of these lines. I just copied it and I'm going to paste it and change this to Shemp. Okay, and then type in Shemp was entered. So you can have as many of these else-if statements that you want, but the first statement has to be if, and the last statement, if you choose to have it, must be an else. You can't stick the else, in other words, between any of the other statements. It must come last if you're going to use it. Now, let me suggest this as well. We don't have to have this line of code. I'm just going to cut it out for right now. We could have this. If it's Mo, else if it's Larry, else if it's Shemp. If it's anything else other than those three names, in this case, nothing will be printed to the console window. I'm going to go ahead and paste back in our else line of code. I'm going to save what we did, build it, and bring up our console window one more time. If then else Mo, we get Mo was entered. If then else Larry, Larry was entered. If then else Shemp, Shemp was entered. If then else Curly, must be Curly. Let's do one more. If then else Curly Joe, must be Curly. Now, let me ask you this question. Why did it do the last line of code? Was it because Curly sounds a lot like Curly Joe? Well, although that sounds like it to us, in computer terms, or in the computer's way of thinking, that value doesn't even closely resemble this value. To us, Curly sounds like Curly, but to the computer, these are completely two different strings of information. But since we have our else statement, it is kind of like the garbage collector. It comes at the very end, and it will handle every other case that we have within our if-then-else statement. So I hope this video was beneficial to you, that you learned a little bit more about if statements and conditional branching within your applications. There's actually several structures that you'll be able to use that do something similar to this, like the case select statement that we're going to talk about in just a few moments, and a few others. But this structure will be used time and time and time again within your applications. So become very familiar with it, get it under your belt, and move on as fast as you can. Thanks a lot. Hope you enjoyed this video.